Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a. Alright, let me try that again. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. Uh, I am once again very excited about something, and I wanted to tell you all about it. There's nothing playing out of these. I should take these off. I went to go see Godzilla minus one, and I have some very, very strong feelings about it. Some very strong feelings. Overall, it was incredible. All of the hype that you're hearing around this movie is true. It's spectacular. The I'm gonna get more into it, but essentially, this is a very, very big return to form for Godzilla. Um, I know that a lot of people really enjoyed Shin Godzilla from 2018. I think. Um, Personally, I didn't have the same appreciation for it that other people did, which is fine. Um, However, I think that the lens with which I see it has changed now that I've seen minus one, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more later. So, numero uno. Um, Godzilla at his core, right? The foundation of the character. I feel like whenever we adapt a character onto the screen, keeping the essence of who the character is extremely important. It's one of the reasons why the MCU Spider-Man gets so much hate because he sort of strayed from what the character is in the comics at his foundations, right? And to a degree, I think that Godzilla has suffered the same misfortune over the years with the legendary monarch monster verse that they've created in the States. Godzilla's sort of like an anti-hero. We root for him, but he's also a monster. There's this weird dynamic going where he's not completely a bad guy. Um, and when I say that this movie is a return to form, I mean that. I mean that in every sense. At the base of why the character was created, he is sort of this effigy of war trauma and the fear of an annihilation that we created, right? He's created by an atomic bomb or powered up by an atomic bomb. Um, and the movie minus one does a really great job of sequencing the years that the movie takes place throughout World War II and even after World War II has ended. The main character who we follow throughout the film has a very, very important story, and I can't emphasize this enough, but this is the first Godzilla movie that I've ever seen that made me care about the human characters, and I've heard that from some other friends also, and I figured out the reason why. It's because the human characters, their conflict is driven by Godzilla, and Godzilla's reason for being there is directly driven by the characters that we follow. Not exclusively the characters that we follow, but Japan and, the everyman, right? And so it creates this dynamic where we do spend quite a bit of time with the human characters, but there's a purpose for it, and they do a great job of making us care about it. Speaking of the Monarch verse, the American Legendary Studios films, Godzilla, like I said, comes from a fear of atomic destruction and the trauma that the East felt after World War II. So, for America, who instilled this fear, to claim Godzilla and make these movies without the understanding of why the character exists or what makes him, sort of a timeless character in the way that he survived for 70 years, it's almost insulting. Like, it's pretty bad. There's an irony there that is not lost on me. And I think that's why it was so refreshing to see this take on the character rather than the legendary films that I've seen for the last couple of years. Because obviously, in the States, the ones that we see the most of are the legendary studio ones, Godzilla Kong, Godzilla King of Monsters, right? The ones with like Millie Bobby Brown and shit, right? It's almost like if there was an Eastern remake of Cloverfield. Cloverfield was a found footage that was made from the trauma of 9/11, right? The monster in that movie symbolizes the destruction on September 11th. Just the sense of why that movie was made and who that movie was supposed to represent gets lost. I also wanted to talk about the idea of a sympathetic monster, because a lot of my friends who have seen this movie mention that, oh, I love Godzilla, he's such a cutie, he's blah blah blah, and this and this and this, right? I have an issue with that, because to me, Godzilla should not be a sympathetic character. He is, like I said earlier, the embodiment of war, fear, and trauma and destruction. Kong can be a sympathetic character because he's taken out of his home, he's tortured, he's ridiculed, and then persecuted for his outburst, right? And even then, he's still protecting someone. So it's a lot easier to project onto him and sympathize with the character as things are happening to him, because he's partially a victim. Well, he's mostly a victim, actually. Godzilla isn't necessarily that. Godzilla is man-made. Like, he comes from destruction, and he's supposed to embody consequences. So, is it sad that he exists? Yes. But he's also just. And I don't think that creating him as this, and I don't think that illustrating him as this underdog really makes sense, because he's not that. And I think that this movie did a great job of highlighting that, because yeah, you kind of want to see him like stomp around and cause chaos, and that's his thing, right? But he is very much the driving negative force in the film. And I appreciated that, because it didn't romanticize who the character is. I think that's very important, and I think that if we continue to make Godzilla films, we need to keep that intact. I also wanted to talk briefly about some of the themes in the film, because obviously, making a movie about World War II, there's going to be destruction and this looming sense of death and fear, but the film also did a very, very great job of highlighting how communities and people rebuild following the end of a war. You see different towns in Japan rebuilding over time and reclaiming the sense of normalcy that they had before they were struck by the war. And even with the main character, once the war has ended, he's still carrying these demons from mistakes that he made during his service. And there's a great line in the film where his wife says, or romantic interest says, "Is your war over?" And he shakes his head and he says no, and he suffers through PTSD for most of the film. And it's until the climax of the film with Godzilla that he's able to work through that and get that sense of closure that he needed, which, like I said before, is directly tied to the monster. So it makes you care about the characters because it's relevant. It's not just some scientist who's trying to study him and goes off to find Godzilla. The things that happen in this movie have a purpose and are related to the monster. But throughout the film, there is this theme of continuing on and living. Throughout the movie, there is this continuous sense of picking up the pieces and rebuilding, reconstructing anything that you have left, and living. A recurring line throughout the movie is just live. Just live. I'm ordering you to live. You carry the weight of and the responsibility of everyone who has died in the wake of the war, and the responsibility of living a fulfilled life as a way of honoring the people who you lost. And I think that's incredible. I think it's extremely profound, and I understand why I was reading reviews on Letterboxd and people were saying I didn't expect to cry in a Godzilla movie. It's because it was important and it was honest. And it's very rare that I see depictions of PTSD in veterans, or even just the aftermath of a war on somebody, as honestly as in this film. And I think it was amazing. I hope that it acts as a bit of an eye-opener for future Godzilla films in the States and in Asia, just that we're able to reconnect with the roots of the character and why he's become so beloved and why he's lasted for 70 years. This would be a very interesting double feature with Oppenheimer. I think having Oppenheimer probably first would be a very cool, like, dynamic, be a very cool, like, view of both sides. I think that'd be cool. I mean, like, if you like history and also action movies, I think this is great, especially if you don't know too much about World War II. Obviously, it's a bit more fulfilling if you're a history buff, but I think movies can be a great way of educating. Although it's very dangerous because they tend to romanticize wars and conflict, but at times they can be great at introducing people to history and concepts that they aren't aware of. What I think was great compared to Shin Godzilla is that it was a lot more grounded, I felt. Shin Godzilla was a lot more bureaucracy and crisis management, which is very cool, but I feel like it's a very specific interest that isn't as accessible to everybody. There was a lot of boardrooms and a lot of talking about how to avoid as much damage as possible, which is realistic, but I felt like -1 really did a great job of connecting with human characters on an individual level, and then globally in the scenes of chaos, making us care not only about the monster but also about the cities that he goes through. So I think they did a great job with that, and that's personally why I prefer it over Shin Godzilla. But with this newfound appreciation for the character that I didn't have before, I'm considering revisiting Shin and seeing if I appreciate it any differently or if I can take away anything else. But I know that some people hold it very, very close to their heart, and if you do, let me know in the comments why you feel that way. Oh, last thing I want to mention, power scaling, alright? I wanted to talk about power scaling for a bit, because the Monarch monsters kind of don't really make sense. Like, Godzilla has a bunch of abilities, and when he does them, they're cool, but I think that -1 made me realize how desensitized I have become to the character, because every time that he does his heat ray in -1, it feels colossal. Like, there's a weight to it, and there's just this sense of, like, oh shit, here it comes. Like, well, this is gonna be bad. And I don't feel that anymore with the American Godzilla films. And there's this really great scene where he does it, and then looks up at the mushroom cloud that he had just created, and there's this sense of, like, sadness, even though there's all this chaos happening and stress. There's just this moment where it's kind of just sad, And I think that is the essence of the character, and that's what's refound in this movie. I was very impressed because the opening sequence of this film takes place on Odo Island, and essentially it's a mechanic island where not much is happening. The main character kind of shows up for a very, like, vague reason, and then Godzilla makes his first appearance there, and it is almost as good as the Jurassic Park T-Rex scene. It was on the same caliber, I want to say. Like, Godzilla shows up, and there's this just sense of, oh my god, something huge is here, and, like, just stay still and hope it doesn't see you. It's amazing. It was such a great way to open the movie because it gave this sense of, like, doom, but also introduced us to the characters and what, in its infancy, Godzilla had the capabilities of. It was so cool. So cool. There were also a couple scenes that reminded me of Jaws, which is one of my favorite films of all time. There's a scene on a fishing boat where Godzilla is pursuing the main characters, and it really takes from some of the best horror movies and, like, scenes of intensity that I've ever seen. The movie is just amazing. Action-wise, it's fantastic. In terms of writing, it's just profound. I cannot recommend this movie enough. It is the best Godzilla movie that I've ever seen, and I think the best disaster movie that I've ever seen. Anyway, that's my little ramblings. I hope you have an amazing New Year. I hope that it is full of awesome monster movies and fulfillment and success. And feel free to weigh in on this movie or anything else you've seen, really, down below. And I'll see you later. Be good. Bye.